Good morning, everyone, and a warm welcome to the European Environmental Bureau's annual conference. A conference that this year has been co-organized by one of our member organizations, FNÖ, in France. My name is Johanna Sandahl, and I'm the president of the EEB, Europe's largest network of environmental NGOs. We gather some 160 organizations all across Europe with a common vision: better future where people and nature thrive together. I'm also the president of the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation, Sweden's largest environmental NGO. At this year's annual conference, we will focus on charting the path to a healthy planet. We will discuss and we will learn more about what policies and which level of ambition that is needed to improve the state of the environment, the health of our ecosystems, and to reduce the risks to human health and well-being. There is no doubt about the urgency of action. Over the last years, we've seen and experienced an increasing number of storms, floods, and fires, all across Europe and all across the world. If you travel through Sweden these days, you will see large areas of dead forests. This is a result of the last year's unusually dry summers that has given the European spruce bark beetle perfect conditions to reproduce, leaving dead forests behind. Over the last years, we've heard about the links between destruction of nature and the risks of new diseases. Science has spoken on the risks to health from air pollution and hazardous chemicals. The chemicals that are now everywhere, in the air we breathe, in the food we eat, in the water we drink, and in the blood of all human beings on this planet. But science has also underlined the benefits to human health and well-being from access to nature. Studies have shown the level of benefits from policy action and the cost of inaction. The health risks from environmental degradation underlines the urgency and the need to act. But it also brings opportunities for change. We are therefore very happy to have Dr. Maria Neira here with us today to talk about the WHO's new air quality guidelines and its wider work. This conference seeks to explore and understand who can and who should do what in the coming years to make sure the right policies are put in place to allow for the ecological and governance transformation that is needed to address the crisis we face. A specific opportunity, of course, lies in the next 2 to 3 years of the European Green Deal to ensure the legacy of the von der Leyen Commission, the Sassoli European Parliament, and the 6 Council presidencies taking us from here to the next European Parliament and Commission. That is France, Czech Republic, Sweden, Spain, Belgium, and Hungary. The European Green Deal is the first of its kind globally, with a well-argued and convincing narrative. However, so far many of the measures are short on action, and there is so much more to do. We want to understand what exactly needs to be done to make the European Green Deal live up to its rhetoric, up to its potential, and address the society's and the planet's needs. We want to understand what the next presidencies of the EU Council can do to create progress. So, a warm welcome to all of you attending this conference. I would now like to give the floor to Arnaud Schwartz, President of the FNÖ, who's joining us from France.
Thank you, Joanna. We're very, very glad to be with you today. And so FNE, France Nature Environnement, is a French umbrella organization for about 6,000 associations. And we are pleased to play this role given the French presidency of the EU. We will build on the work of the current Slovenian presidency and have a full plate of legislative and non-legislative files, from climate to biodiversity to chemicals to pollution. The list goes on. We are particularly pleased to have Minister Pompili joining us, as France will be the one taking over the EU Council presidency in January 2022, following on the presidency from Slovenia. The Fit for 55 climate package will be a major opportunity for French influence to keep the spirit of Paris alive, as well as progressing on biodiversity, health, chemicals, well-being. The list of needs is long, and we are sharing our vision of this way, our 10 green tests for the French presidency. The French presidency is the first of their trio, complemented by the Czech Republic and Sweden. After that, we have Spain, Belgium during the next EP elections, and Hungary when the new parliament and commission will be in place. We have almost 3 years to get the European Green Deal right, and 6 member states driving forward progress. And throughout this time, we have civil society asking for urgent action, scientists presenting evidence on what will happen if we don't act, and hopefully more and more action from the city level up to the global level. Cities are driving important progress locally, responding to the green waves of local elections. We will hear today from Françoise Bonnet on what cities are doing. Regions too are promoting progress, with different levels of agency across Europe pending the regional competencies. Nations have strong competencies and responsibilities to their peoples, working both at home and in the European and international contexts. Ultimately, we need local action with local to global consequences and global acting with global to local impacts. We are beyond the point of one stakeholder saying another should address the problem, and the conference is exploring how we can overcome the major hindrances, the blockages, the lock-ins that keep us from deeper systematic change. All of us need to work together transparently, each with enough space to make a difference. We also want to hear more about what stakeholders have to say about the future they want and the future they are striving to make happen. We are therefore pleased to have an excellent panel to present the perspective. We look forward to the panel discussion on this and the breakout session this afternoon as to who can and should do what to put us on a path to a healthy planet. To give civil society the space we need to share our understanding and vision, to develop collaborations, to improve governance of decision-making, to support legitimacy of democratic institutions and processes, and to work together, rolling up our sleeves to make the transition happen. A lot is on the Commission's shoulders, and we'd like to thank Veronica Manfredi, who is the director responsible for the zero pollution ambition at the European Commission, for joining us. But we also know that the EP can be a voice of progress, unfortunately with exceptions. And the Council can put the brakes on commitments. There is only progress if all 3 institutions agree. So we need to all work to motivate each. We have an opportunity in these coming years at EU level. A lot can happen, and it will need the support of social, environmental, and climate justice to help leaving a planet in a better state. Key themes for our invitees Tetiana Stadnik, and Asad Rehman. Patricia will say more. I give it now over to the moderators.
Thank you to our EEB President Johanna Santal and to FNO President Arno Schwarz for opening the European Environmental Bureau's 2021 annual conference. And good morning to everyone. My name is Patricia Heidegger and I will be one of the two co-moderators this morning. As we've heard, we're going to have a very exciting program ahead of us this morning. We will welcome the French Minister for the Ecological Transition, Barbara Pompili, for her intervention and a short dialogue with our Secretary General, Jeremy Waits. And then we will hear from Maria Nera, Director for Public Health and Environment at the World Health Organization. She will share her vision of a healthy planet and discuss with my co-moderator, Patrick ten Brink. We will then move to the panel debate with a broad range of stakeholders to share their perspectives, their visions, their recommendations on what needs to be done to chart our path to a healthy planet and what they will do. Now, how can you interact with the speakers this morning? You're joining us on an online platform on House Space. We're waiting for your questions in the Q&A box, in particular for sessions 2 and 3. Please also share your opinion by answering to the questions that we're sharing on Slido. And do not hesitate to share your thoughts and comments through social media using the hashtag EB21. Now let me hand over to my co-moderator, Patrick ten Brink.
Great. No, thank you very much, Patricia. I'm Patrick ten Brink of the EEB. I wanted to just reiterate a little bit the red line, the red thread of this conference. I mean, we're trying to focus on what are the links between the health risks and environmental degradation and pressures. So we don't understand how and what we should do to be able to leave the planet in a fair state for the next generation. As mentioned before, we have a vision. What is your vision for the future? How can we be inspired from what's happened already successfully in the past? What system change is necessary? Because we obviously need more than small steps. And how can we achieve it? And who can do what on this pathway? All the results from today will also be feeding into all of our work on the Green Deal. We work across the dossiers and for the 6 presidencies all the way to the next Parliament. But one key issue one key question we have is the Slido question, which is focused on the Green Deal. I don't know if it can come up now, but I'll read out the questions. So we want to understand from you, what has the European Green Deal achieved to date and what needs to be done? Okay, so you're able to tick all of the boxes. So starting at one end, the Green Deal goes too far. It's already asking for too much from industry and countries, and the next 3 years risk making it even worse, i.e. it's way too much. B, it is an ambitious transformative agenda that will fully address the environmental crisis we face, so it's just right. C, it has the potential to be an ambitious transformative agenda but is weakened by the lack of ambitions, of laws and commitments. Significant efforts are needed to ensure it lives up to its ambitions. So it is not enough, but it's fixable. And D, there are too many examples of where policies actually undermine the Green Deal. Without a major effort, the Green Deal risks being greenwashed and a missed opportunity, i.e. it's far too little, but fixable, just. And finally, E, there are ever-increasing loopholes, exceptions, weaknesses, and contradictory policies in the Green Deal, and expectations that things will get worse the next years. Decision makers are reneging on their responsibilities, and there is no hope that the Green Deal will be the once-in-a-generation change we need, i.e. the Green Deal is broken. So you can choose those 5 or several. It's just to get a sense of temperature for what your expectations is. And with that, and the results of this will be picked up again by Jeremy at the end of this morning's session. So please do have a look at them. But now I'd like to hand over to Jeremy Waits, our Secretary General, who will then introduce our first speaker, Minister Pompili. Thank you very much. We'll have a few seconds break as we invite Jeremy Waits onto the platform.
Well, thank you to Patricia and Patrick, our co-moderators, for describing the programme for us today. One of the strong themes of today's conference, and not only today's conference but the EEB's work in general, is the key role that EU presidencies play in setting the agenda and in shaping the agenda. So we're particularly pleased today that we will be joined by the French Minister for Ecological Transition, Barbara Pompili, who will preside over the Environment Council when France takes over the EU presidency on the 1st of January. France will be kicking off, as you've already heard, a new trio of presidencies being followed by the Czech Republic and Sweden, and we really hope this will be a period not only when the worst of COVID is behind us, but also when we're not just returning to the normal of the pre-COVID days, but to a new normal. The minister's job title, en français, Ministre de la Transition écologique, already contains a directional message about the need for transition as compared with the more usual environment minister. And indeed, there are high hopes for the French presidency that it will be able to inject new ambition into the EU's efforts to tackle the major environmental problems that Europe and the world face. So we're all very keen to hear from the Minister about France's plans and ambitions for its upcoming presidency. Madame la Ministre, bienvenue. C'est un grand plaisir de vous accueillir ici, aujourd'hui, dans cet espace virtuel. Bien sûr, c'est dommage que nous ne soyons pas tout le monde à Paris, mais c'est comme ça. Madame, la parole est à vous.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you for your French. It's better than my English, but I will try. Ladies and gentlemen, dear all, I'm delighted to be with you today for this annual conference of the European Environmental Bureau. Really delighted. As you know, I'm deeply committed to environmental democracy and to the participation of all the stakeholders in the decision making. This is why I'm very fond of this kind of exchanges. I've been fighting, for ecology for more than 20 years now. So I know how your constant efforts are truly essential to accelerate awareness and the implementation of new public policies. And I would like to add that I'm really often impressed by the quality of the work done by Brussels-based NGOs. Your contributions help us, the policymakers, to reach a more ambitious European legislation. So let's keep challenging those who greenwash their activities, keep challenging our more cautious partners, and keep challenging us. Your efforts will greatly help to make the Green Deal real and to arm Europe with the most ambitious climate and environmental legislation in the world. Today, I would like to share with you the main orientation of the incoming French presidency. Our presidency comes at a crucial time for Europe's climate and environmental ambitions. It's not only an opportunity, it's also a moment of responsibility. Our expectation, your expectations, those of Europe's civil society are high, and we definitely need to meet them. I would also like to underline that ecological transition is not limited to climate actions. What we want is a systemic change, and this change requires a cross-sectoral approach, a holistic one, and as often said in Brussels. For these reasons, I want to focus on 4 equal, and I insist on equal, priorities for our presidency. My first priority is to boost the decarbonization of our economy and society. We have a strong objective, reaching carbon neutrality by 2050. We have a clear roadmap to meet this goal, which is to reduce net emissions by at least 55% by 2030. To succeed, we need to adapt the European legislation as soon as possible. We can rely on 2 pillars. On one hand, our current carbon market, the ETS, this system has proven its efficiency and it must be strengthened as proposed by the Commission. On the other hand, we have to raise national emission reduction targets, while we also have to guarantee a fair effort sharing. This last point is paramount. I will be especially careful to ensure that our climate policies are sustainable and fair for citizens, our companies, and our territories. I want to make it a central element of the French presidency. I'm confident that we will prove that climate and social ambition not only can, but also must be addressed together. Furthermore, we must put our trade policy at the service of our climate and environmental ambition. The implementation of a carbon border adjustment mechanism allows us to reinforce the climate requirements of our partners, but it will also help to establish the basis for a global carbon price. France is very committed to this creative mechanism. My second priority is biodiversity. As President Macron said in Marseille during the World Conservation Congress, biodiversity and climate are twin fights. If we want to succeed, they must be tackled together. We are still waiting for the European Commission's proposal, but I can tell you that I intend to push Europe forward on 3 major files. First, the adoption of a clear and ambitious EU position for COP15 in order to reaffirm our leadership. We need a global framework fit for purpose with appropriate financing and efficient implementation mechanism. Second, France will promote the definition of legally binding objectives for the restoration of biodiversity. Third, the fight against imported deforestation is also a priority. It is both a political and moral responsibility for Europe, but it is also the most efficient way to act against deforestation by cutting off the financial flows. In addition, I also wish to support measures that will limit pressures on the environment more broadly. Here, I am thinking about agriculture in the context of the implementation of the farm to fork strategy, as well as the implementation of a green taxonomy. My third priority is to accelerate the transformation of the European economic model. We must make it more circular and more sustainable. This is not only an environmental issue, but also an economic one, which touches upon the European Union's technological sovereignty. The current negotiations on the battery regulation is a relevant example of how we must take into account the entire life cycle of a product, from its development to its waste treatment. Therefore, I would like to move forward on the upcoming Commission's proposal on eco-design. It will help to reduce pollution at the source and to empower consumers. Yes, because we are well aware that for our green transition, detailed and understandable ecological labeling is key. Finally, I would like to insist on the reduction of pollution impacts, especially in relation with chemicals. We owe our citizens a healthier environment. I am particularly pleased that the Commission has listened to our repeated warnings about endocrine disruptors or about the need for swifter, more independent analysis by the European agencies. Another point, we must ban the export of the hazardous substances which cannot be sold in the internal market. Key legislative proposals might not be published in time for presidency. Nevertheless, I wish to organize discussions amongst ministers and stakeholders to guide the Commission. Ladies and gentlemen, as you see, the program is vast. We have a big responsibility implementing the European Green Deal, but be sure I will be totally committed to address those 4 equal priorities during the French presidency. You can count on me to bring them high on the agenda, both at European and international level. The stakes are high and all hands on decks. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Minister Pompili. And indeed, I think no one could disagree that that's an extremely broad programme. It's certainly ambitious in its breadth, and we obviously hope it'll be ambitious in its depth as well in terms of the specific goals under those 4 areas, which are in fact a lot more than 4 areas because there are sub-areas that you enumerated. So I think that was really helpful. And we all know that on top of that, you have a number of important international meetings like UNER, the second part of UNER 5, like Stockholm Plus 50. So it's certainly a very broad agenda you've got. And that leads me to ask you, what do you think will be the biggest challenges in the way of achieving what you want to achieve under your presidency? And well, I mean, we've seen, for example, the recent rise in energy prices. Is there a risk that you get some kind of gilet jaune type of pushback against this, even though, of course, it's not renewable energy prices that are going up? You've mentioned that climate and social ambition must go together, which I think is a very important message. But do you think enough is being done to make sure that they do and to prevent that kind of pushback? Or are there other challenges that you would see in the way of achieving what you want to achieve?
Yes, you're right. I do believe that our main challenge is the acceptability of the environmental and climate transition. Today, people are more and more convinced of the need to transform our development model. Almost nobody questions the need to strongly reduce the impact of human activities on the environment and climate. This is an important victory if we look back to the situation just some years ago. In France, we experienced, as you said, 2 years ago, with the Yellow Jacket movement, how people can reject new climate legislations when they are feeling excluded of the transition. I think this must be a warning for all Europe, especially at a time where we're facing the worst energy prices since the great oil shocks in the 1970s. Speaking of the energy prices, I believe we must not stir up fears. We must continue to act for ambitious green policies. The ecological transition, the decarbonization give the solution. They are not the cause of the current crisis. And we have to explain this. Now we must convince people that this transformation is possible, hopeful and fair. To achieve this goal, we must accompany those populations mobilizing adequate funding. I am fully aware of the concerns expressed by my European colleagues, by your citizens, and by your companies. We must respond to them and set up a robust and effective system so that no one is left behind. But this imperative must not lead to a regression of our ambitions. There, I think in particular of the Fit for 55 package. As presidency, we will be very vigilant to maintain the overall level of ambition during the negotiation. Another challenge is our ability to mainstream our ambition outside Europe. It's also a question of fairness and acceptability for citizens and companies. We need to be particularly innovative, and some proposals are or will be on the table. I think of the duty of due diligence for companies, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, the imported deforestation upcoming proposals, or the generalization of mirror clauses. The link with our trade policy is also very strong. This requires a huge mobilization at international level and to reinforce our cooperation with third countries, especially the most vulnerable ones. But overall, I am confident that we'll find solutions to move forward, but obviously together.
Great. Well, thanks very much. I think we might have time for one more question. We know that you have to leave us fairly soon. We've seen a sort of a green wave in the recent German elections, not just in the success of the Green Party, but also in the greening of other parties' manifestos. And I want to ask you if you think the likelihood of a greener government in Berlin has implications for the French presidency's environmental ambitions, enabling you to perhaps think bigger and go further?
At this stage, I think it's difficult to have a clear vision pending the formation of a governing coalition. However, I note that these elections have shown a deep interest for environmental and climate issues in the German public debate, and this is a good thing. When I started to advocate for the protection of the environment 20 years ago, it was not really part of the public debate. And today, the environment is a key issue of political elections. So I'm very happy that the German elections gave citizens the opportunity to raise some insertion points. And I hope that the upcoming French election will be an opportunity for such exciting debates. In any case, Germany will remain our major partner with whom we work very closely and share a common ambition. And I've no doubt that their commitment will be an asset for the success of the French presidency. So I look forward to working with my German colleagues, and I keep working with the former colleagues who are still here and with whom we do a great work.
Well, thank you very much, Minister. If I could just squeeze in a final comment or question which you might like to react to. Would you agree that we have a real problem with this disjunct between some of the very good high-level narrative that comes out with the European Green Deal, for example, and the actual translation of that into concrete policies? And you've mentioned the 55% 2030 target, but I think, you know, not just a lot of NGOs and the public, but the science itself says that that's not going to be enough to get us where we need to get to in terms of carbon neutrality, and especially because it's a net target. And so I wonder if can you see a way in which how are we going to bridge that gap in the terms of the 55% target? For us, it means we simply need to overshoot in those Fit for 55 package. We've got to be more ambitious in the individual elements that will enable us to overshoot the minus 55 target. Would you agree with that general approach?
I think politicians, company has to understand that ecological transition is a chance for economy. I was in Mexico last week, and I realized that it's not an opinion shared by everybody. And many people continue to think that ecology is an obstacle to the development of economy. And when you think that, you cannot move forward. So it's my job and it's our job to make people understand that ecological transition is a chance for economies, and the companies and the governments who don't decide to go on this way will lose and maybe will die. And I think about companies who don't invest now. This company will not exist anymore in a few years. So I think it's the most important thing to do, because the goal is high. You say that, but it is not high if we do it together, and we have to make investors and banks understand that too. And after, the goal would be not so high, I think.
Thank you so much, Minister. It's been a great pleasure to talk to you. At the beginning, you sort of invited us to keep challenging you, and we will certainly do that, and we'll be doing that in the fairly near future with a set of dozen demands that we will present to the trio, the presidency trio, but also a bit later 10 tests for the French EU presidency. This is a long-standing EEB tradition where we challenge presidencies with 10 tests, and at the end of the presidency we evaluate them. So we certainly will be doing that. But more generally, we've enjoyed the very good collaboration we've had with you and your services, and we hope that that will continue throughout the presidency and beyond. So again, thank you very much for joining us today. And I think you've given a lot of food for thought to all the participants on this conference. And with that, I thank you, au revoir, and I'm going to hand back to Patrick, who's going to lead us into the next session. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeremy. Thank you very much, Minister. So this session now we're going to head on to have Dr. Maria Neira speak. She's a Spanish physician and diplomat. She has advised several governments and UN bodies on public health, including her own government as Vice Minister of Health and Consumer Affairs between 2002 and 2005. She's been serving as the Director of Public Health, Environment and Social Determinants of Health Department at the World Health Organization since 2005, and she's an architect behind the air quality guidelines, which are making important waves now. And also in November 2019, Maria Neira joined the high-level advisory board of the Lancet Countdown, tracking progress on health and climate change, a global group of leading scientists working to ensure that health is at the center of governments and that they understand and respond to climate change. So I'm very, very pleased to have Dr. Maria Neira here. She will talk to us about the guidelines, but also a much wider picture of pollution and what we need to do. Thank you very much for joining us. We can't hear you. One second, we can't hear you.
Yes?
Okay.
Fantastic. Very good. Now, I was saying that I really enjoyed the presentation by the minister. It's very important to have people in such an important leadership position that will stimulate, that will have a very clear language, and then they are committed to this fantastic transition that we all need. Today is a positive day, so we are presenting this afternoon, for those of you who I'm sure you will be very much interested, we are presenting on a press conference at 5 o'clock Geneva time, what we call the health argument for climate action. And it's a WHO report, and you will tell me, okay, this is again another report by WHO, and but this one is really special. We want this report to be put in the middle of the table of the negotiations and the discussions at the COP26. Everybody's saying that the COP26 has to be special, that it has to be very action-oriented, that it has to be the one showing level of ambition and finally taking very important political decisions. For us, this will be possible if the health argument is very strong, and if people realize that by connecting the environmental agenda, the climate change agenda to my health, the health of my family, and the health of our community now, not for the next generation, but even now, I think this can accelerate enormously this agenda, make it much more ambitious than what it is at the moment, and certainly accelerating and changing the speed. Because if you look at the acronym COP26, it's very nice. We even forget what that means, but COP26 means that for 27 years, because in fact it should be COP27, for 27 years, the world has been discussing about the need to do something to tackle the causes of climate change and to adapt to what is happening already. Can we afford 27 years to discuss such a critical, historic emergency, and the one that will be conditioning our society on such an incredible way? So for us, we want to say that this climate treaty, the Paris Treaty, is nothing else than probably the biggest public health treaty ever, of course, if we implement it correctly. So let me go to the positive language again. Plenty of positive things. One, WHO has presented the new air quality guidelines. It's true that now the levels that we are proposing are much more strict. We are saying that if we want to protect the health of the people, we need to go to reduce those standards that we have until now on a very serious way. And governments must say this is very difficult to achieve, this is very ambitious, this is very challenging. True, it's all very challenging, but what is at the end of the road is that we need to protect the health of the people. And the positive message here is very simple. If you implement, if the world goes for reaching the targets, the levels, the normative proposed by WHO, particularly on PM 2.5, we could reduce by 80% the number of deaths that we are having every year. What about that? I mean, we are talking about 7 million premature deaths occurring every year due to exposure to air pollution. And those are the number of deaths. In addition to that, of course, you have millions of quality of life that you are losing. And since we need to talk as well in economic terms, a very heavy cost for our health system, which is as well a country finance system. And that cost for the health is not normally considered into all the models that they do for deciding whether investing on mitigating the climate change will be something, a good investment or not. Please include in all of those mathematical models, include the externalities. The cost of the externalities means how much our society, our health systems are paying already many times the subsidies you are giving to the fossil fuels, and how much this will be a fantastic positive health outcome if you stop to do it. So the first part of my good news is that go for the implementation, the serious, rigorous application of the new air quality guidelines, and you will see the incredible impact, the positive one that you can have on the lives of the people, how many lives you can save. You can tell that to your citizens if you are a politician, and I am sure that this will help you to gain a lot of votes. This is a political agenda in the very good sense of political, which means having an interest on the global population, on the population that you need to protect and for which you need to ensure well-being and not just the absence of disease. So this is the first good news. The second one is that if you put in place a system that will look at a transition, a healthy energy transition, if you accelerate what, fortunately, some ministers of ecology or ecological transition in several countries already, if we help you, Minister of Ecology, by using the health argument, by quantifying the health benefits that this will represent for the health of the people, I think we can achieve a lot. The Minister of Ecology was saying something extremely important, that still in some parts around the world, there is a wrong perception that being an ecologist or working on an ecological transition will not be beneficial in economic terms. And I think we can help a lot on giving the health arguments for that, on changing all of those wrong perceptions that people might have about the ecology. The first one is that if you are an ecologist, you need to be from the left wing or something like that. I think the ecological transition is something that will benefit now all society, and it will benefit not only on economic terms, but on health terms and social terms. So we all need to go for that, and probably will generate even more jobs. So on a time where we need to decide on the investments that there will be done after COVID-19, please thinking green, but thinking healthy as well. And the ecological transition to a healthy, renewable source of energy is probably one of the best investments from a public health point of view that we can do today. The combustion of fossil fuels is killing us, is literally killing us. And I think we need to make that very visible for our citizens. I think with your support on advocacy, on the strong network that you have, we all need to make sure that this is not another tobacco, in the sense that it took us more than 50 years from the day we knew that tobacco was a problem in terms of public health and it was affecting our health dramatically until we signed this framework convention on tobacco. They were more than 50 years, and we cannot accept another 50 years for the fossil fuels. I would love to see in any petrol station now a similar ban to the ones we have on the tobacco packages, and saying fossil fuels kill us. And then some images about people suffocating because of the respiratory diseases or all the damage that it causes to our body, which, as you well know, PM 2.5, they can not only damage our lungs, but through the bloodstream, they can reach any organ and causing a very, very terrible damage. The positive thing of that is that, well, if you accelerate this energy transition, the benefits for the health will be enormous. If you accelerate the sustainable food transition, the benefits for the health will be enormous. And the health system is ready to be there to quantify all of those benefits and to be translated in a language that any citizen around the world can understand. If you facilitate the healthy urban transition, the benefits for the health of the people will be enormous. We will reduce our obesity, all the diseases linked to the metabolic syndrome. We will increase our active lifestyle and reduce diseases linked to the sedentary lifestyle that we have now, traffic incidents, name it, the benefit. So when you are in front of something so positive, how can you deny the reality? Is something wrong that we are doing probably on our messages? And maybe we were not focusing in the right message that we want our people to get and to promote. Maybe we were talking to an elite. Maybe we were already preaching to the converted into the ecological terms. My question that we ask ourselves every day is how this will be digested and endorsed by a very modest, in financial terms, family living outside London or outside Paris, the people who need to commute every day and maybe they have a very old car, people who cannot afford to buy organic food because they're very expensive, people who cannot afford to have a very nice building or an electric car and energy efficient. So we need to talk to that people, and they will understand that if the pollution in the street, the air pollution in the street is very high, this will be affecting the asthma cases in their family if they have it already. And this is the language that we need to now accelerate on a positive terms, and we need to clear the air we are breathing, we need to clear the water we are drinking, and we need to clear somehow the food we are eating. I think we need to lead this green, healthy, and positive movement, talking to every citizen, not only the ecologist of a long history already converted. We need to make sure that we approach these people, and we need to make sure that we do all of that in the name of health. And I think that could be the most, one of the strongest arguments. Let me stop here and go back to you to make sure that you want to keep it short, or if you want me to keep talking on more things that are happening at the moment. Over.
Okay, great. No, thank you very much for that introduction. I was deeply moved by your recognition of the importance of speed and urgency on underlying the quality of life, and also to basically to speak to the various citizens to understand their perspectives and needs, to engage them. I have, and also none of us hope that the fossil fuels becomes the new tobacco. I've got a couple of questions, and more are coming in now from across Europe. The first question is linked back to European policy, and we'll get to cities later, because the EU is now in the middle of launching its Green Deal, 2 years in, 3 years to go. And just before the summer, it embraced a zero pollution ambition as part of its zero pollution action plan. So what do you actually think of the Green Deal and the ZPAP, or the zero pollution ambition? And what advice would you have for the Commission and the Parliament and the Member States in actually finalizing it and making sure it has sufficient teeth?
Yeah, thank you. The Green Deal and the zero pollution are certainly strategies and initiatives that we are following with a lot of interest, and we are very happy to see this moving. Obviously, when you talk about public health, your level of ambition has to be very high, and you are never ambitious enough, allow me to say it like this. So obviously, we would like to see even more speed on all of that, because Europe has the responsibility to look for the health and well-being of the European citizens, of course. But in addition to that, as you know, Europe has another role, which is leading, championing, giving a good example. And for us, as a global organization, we are using very often exactly that. I mean, we are using the Green Deal or the zero pollution strategy as a way to engage with other governments, with other countries, and saying this can be done. And look at the European Union countries; their economy is very healthy compared with others, and they are still moving into this ecological transition in a very serious way. So this perception about the fact that if you engage on an ecological transition, you will put at risk your economy is false. You have the Scandinavians as well that can give you the similar example. So what we would like to do is that we are very keen on working very closely with the European Union on making sure that we put a lot of pressure on measuring the health benefits of the zero pollution strategy and the European Green Deal. And again, on a positive way, by giving those health arguments, hoping that this will generate a further motivation among citizens and more engagement. And even if there are political challenges, if you use the health argument, I think you can go around those on a more convincing and probably more positive and impactful way.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. I like the link you make between environmental policy and public health policy. So, in fact, all of us working in the environmental field, we're also basically working for the public health policy in a way. And I think that opens the door to quite a few more alliances. A couple of questions have come in from on the cities basis. You mentioned cities. So a question here from Samuel Martin Souza. Many European cities are far from complying with the former WHO guidelines, or indeed also the rules under the Ambient Air Quality Directive. And it's also the case, of course, in Spain, that many cities are non-compliant with that ambition. So EU enforcement doesn't unfortunately work sufficiently yet. So how can we actually move towards getting member states to systematically, well, comply with legislation at one level, but also implement basically your guidelines, which are not legally binding, but they should be morally binding?
Yeah, let me start with that final part on legally binding or not. WHO's guidelines are not legally binding, but of course, each government, each country can go as far as they want. I mean, why not a legislation, a very stronger legislation? And there are several cases of litigation in the European countries during the last months of years, which are giving us a very interesting point for reflection and for thinking. Personally, I think we should go at country level for something as close to a legislation on the levels of, on air quality. We all have legislation around clean water, the quality of the water we drink. I don't see why we cannot have something similar in terms of the quality of the air we breathe, which has a devastating impact on our health as the lack of quality on the water we drink could have. So I will very much incline on pushing for that. Now, it's true that the European cities, they did a big effort in the past years, and in fact, they are very well advanced vis-a-vis other countries, but we still have 400,000 deaths every year in Europe caused by exposure to air pollution. We still have a lack of coherence in some of the policies. We still give some subsidies to fossil fuels in some countries. We still have coal in other countries, coal production. So there are things that can be done. It's true that the last piece, when you are reaching the top of a mountain, is probably the most difficult one. But come on, we are talking about the health of the people, and it's possible. Because 50 years ago, or even 20 years ago, or even 15 years ago, when the previous air quality guidelines was presented, people say this is impossible. And today it's possible in some countries. So why not now? The new ones, which are telling us, if we keep the levels we have, we are not saving the lives of the people. So we need to go lower in our standards, because otherwise we are not doing our job, which is to protect the health of the people. And I think that is a motivation. I think our citizens that are now linking very much the bad quality of the air they breathe in the cities, they are putting a lot of pressure on mayors. I think mayors are more and more becoming very conscious that this issue of air pollution can give them a very good opportunity for proving and giving something tangible to their citizens that they will appreciate. At the beginning, those measures might be a little bit perceived by certain segments of society as restrictions, but later on, they will see it as something very, very positive, and the benefits are quite immediate. So if I were a politician, a mayor, I will certainly go for that. And I can assure you that many mayors could win their elections if they go for very good measures to reduce air pollution. I'm pretty sure that the city will be completely different and very attractive, and that will give them plenty of votes.
Okay, thanks. I hope a lot of mayors are listening. Can I just dig a little bit deeper in this issue? And there's a question here from Davide Sabada. Do we need town by town, city by city, detailed figures about health impacts to raise awareness of decision makers? We know that there's good emissions data, often quite live stuff, and of course it could be improved. But what about wider health impacts? And just to build on that a little bit, and you mentioned asthma before, and the benefits. Certainly in Brussels in the last 5 to 10 years, there's been quite a lot happening. There's no drive zones, there's 30-kilometer limits, there's quite a lot of investment in bicycle paths and so on as well. And I think that certainly there was, as you said, there was a lot of complaints at a certain moment in certain areas, but I think the population really is appreciating it in many parts. So, but back to the question, do you think we also need to have sort of health impact information at city level to be able to communicate and get decision makers to take it as seriously as you say?
Yeah, the answer is definitely yes, in my opinion, because this is something that, and in addition to that, we have the tools to do it. We can do an assessment of the impact on our health depending on the levels of pollution that you have. We have the AQ+. I invite you to go to the website of WHO. You will have plenty of tools that can be very useful. So we have the scientific evidence, we have the tools, we have the interventions, we have plenty of data, we have simulations, name it, no excuses. Everything is there. So yes, an assessment of the health, the impact on our health, and something that it could be even more attractive, an assessment and quantification, or at least a qualitative quantification of what could be the benefits. So if you reduce the pollution levels in 6 months, those could be the expected benefits for our health. But if you do it in 3 months instead of 6, those are the expected benefits. So instead of saying every year in this city, because of air pollution, so many citizens are dying, we can even change it and put it in the positive way and say, thanks to the policies that you're putting in place, you are saving so many lives. And I think this is the way of changing things. Yes, using the health argument and making it very, very powerful, and for people to understand. Just one comment, in India, in New Delhi, probably some of you saw that on Twitter or many other newspapers and others, huge lungs made with tissue, and a special representation that it was capturing the pollution, and it was at the entrance of the city. And you put it today, and 2 days later, you will see that it will be totally black. That tissue, which was white, it will become totally black and then polluted. And I think that was such a visualization, such a powerful one, people understand very well what that means for your lungs if you cannot breathe proper air. And as I say, they will visualize the lungs. The rest is something that we know as well, that even your brain will be now very much affected. So we need to move quickly.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for that. Just to build on that, I mean, we do hear about, everyone knows about bronchitis and asthma and things like that, but I've also seen some scientific studies looking at impacts of air pollution on early onset dementia, also on birth weights and even cranial capacity. So the science has been giving up more and more evidence over time, which shows that we really need to act. I've got a wider question now. So during COVID, we saw a rise in interest in well-being. And many, including us, argue that well-being should take sort of primacy in policy making and economic growth. In Vienna 2 years ago, there was a workshop, and the following phrase was embraced: the well-being queen should dethrone the GDP king. What place do you think well-being should have in this policy making? Do you like that phrase? And should it be more important compass than it is now for policy making?
Yeah, that's a very good remark. It's not a question. I fully agree with what is proposed. Actually, 2 days ago, I was at an interparliamentarian meeting in Rome, at the Parliament of Rome. And it was very interesting that Giorgio Parisi, the recent Nobel Prize, he did a fantastic speech talking exactly about that. Please forget the GDP as an indicator of well-being and start to look at something else. And if I could choose, obviously, well-being and the quality of our life, and particularly on basic indicators. As you know, the UN human rights for the environment, they were very celebrating on Friday as well that now is recognized as a human right, a healthy, sustainable and green environment. Come on. I mean, yes, we need to celebrate that, but it's really incredible. In 2021, we still need to fight to have the right to a clean environment. I thought this should be by default, no? I thought this should be one of our basic human rights, clean water, clean food, clean air. If not, I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe my notion of basic public health is confused, but access to clean air seems to me that is one of those basic, non-negotiable human right.
No, I agree. And if we could add that also access to green spaces, I think some cities have had some interesting commitments towards having access to green spaces within 400 meters for every citizen. But I've got one more question from Florida de Como, and it links to the sort of practical issue and sort of also social distributional impacts. Awareness raising is maybe not what low-income people need to be able to address it, because they can't afford an electric car or ecological food. And I think you mentioned the price differentials. So what do we need to focus on? Do we need to focus rather on strong policies for public transport and healthy food? What can we do to facilitate individuals moving forward? Because not everyone has the same capacity to react, and we don't want to leave anyone behind.
Yeah, it's exactly, I fully agree as well. We said that if we want to move on this post-COVID healthy and green recovery and fair recovery, some very strong government policies needs to be taken. Of course, each of us, we will have a responsibility, some more than others, but we cannot put the responsibility on the low and middle income class people, because they cannot afford most of those interventions. They cannot even change maybe and have a more energy efficient system at home, because they have a very old house and it's not their property, therefore they cannot afford to invest. I mean, we need to have some decisions at the government level that will be taken into consideration this enormous part of the population. And of course, starting with a sustainable public transport policy will be an important one. Then looking at the subsidies that we are giving for fossil fuels and how quick we are doing this transition, which will allow the middle and low class people to have as well access to that, and stop the subsidies which are receiving now, but they, on one hand, they are receiving it, but on the other hand, they need to pay the hospital when they are affected by the diseases caused by that combustion. So we need a strong governments with a strong conviction that we need to tackle the causes of climate change, and one of them will be very clearly, if we go for it, generate many benefits in terms of reducing the air pollution, and that will generate health benefits. And this is the part that we need to tell to our citizens, particularly those who are living in places where are not so socially attractive as other places in the city where you can afford many other of the ecological interventions.
Okay, great. No, thank you very much for that. We're now heading slowly towards the limits. So I'd just like to say, first of all, a huge thank you, but also to lift out a few things that I thought were particularly interesting. One is we talked about, the urgency. We talked about the need for implementing these guidelines, that all environmental legislation in a way is public health legislation. And so there are potentials for great alliances. We also went down to the city level as to what people can do, because everyone needs to be engaged and we should have solutions for them. One thing we haven't talked about so far, we have half a minute left, and maybe to give you the last word, is one thing is ambition in a direct line on sort of ambient air quality directives or whatever, but you have a huge swathe in the Green Deal. You have dozens of pieces of legislation, hundreds. You've also got other areas like industrial emissions, you've got auto emissions and so on. So is the challenge as well of making sure that all of the health issues are fully integrated across all the legislation? I mean, there's a bit of a word here, but coherence and consistency.
Yeah, that is exactly the point I would like to make at the end. I mean, we need to make sure that all governments, all legislators, and all environmentalists, that they realize how much their decisions will affect positively or negatively our health. And I think we could include a catalog of health benefits, a way to measure the health benefits, or a way to measure as well how many lives are you not saving even if you have the possibility to do it. A kind of health impact assessment and health benefits assessment will be very useful to increase the level of ambition and the speed of all of this. So yes, you are environmentalists, that you are public health officers with a huge responsibility, and we join you on that.
So thanks a huge amount for joining us today. I think that's been very, very interesting and brought the two communities much closer together. So I think we had, last count of 360 people had signed up. Maybe it was already more by the time the speeches started. So huge thanks from us. We're now going to go to have a 10-minute break. And then we'll go back to Patrizia for the panel discussion. But thank you again, Dr. Maria Neira. And now, coffee break. Thank you.
Kent je dat moment? Je steekt je lepel in een pot crème glacé en hop, de lepel voor de vuilbak. Nee, wacht. Mijn naam is Witse en ik ben een maker. En ik maak graag dingen. En meer specifiek, ik maak graag mooie dingen met oud materiaal. Ze noemen dat upcycling. En het verzamelen van dat materiaal, urban mining. Nee, dat is de traditionele manier van mijnbouw. Je neemt iets van de aarde, je maakt er een product van en als het stuk gaat, belandt het op de afvalberg. En wat nu als we met dat materiaal aan de slag zouden gaan, alvorens het op de afvalberg belandt?
De maakfabriek is eigenlijk één groot dorp.
Op het dorpsplein staan machines. Rond het dorpsplein kan iedereen de grond huren.
En als je dan verdiepen extra nodig hebt,
dan bouwt je er gewoon in.
Wilt je er 2? Een derde, misschien een 5e.
Dat kan ook. En als je iets niet zeker weet, dan vraag je het gewoon aan uw buur.
Ik ben Caroline en ik ben van afgelakte boilers lampen aan het maken.
My name is Christopher and I'm using old mattresses to make a dragon. Because I like it.
Wij zijn een jazzclub aan het bouwen, gewoon omdat het kan.
Ik heb net een oud terras afgebroken.
Ik heb een deel van het hout gebruikt om een klimmuur te bouwen.
Vensters, schappen, bureaus.
En de klimgrepen maak ik van gebroken skateboards.
Ik ben Jasper, ik ben Merco en met oud metaal ben ik een pers aan het lassen om met afvalpapier de kilo zaagsel van de zaagmachines nieuwe stoelen te persen.
De maakfabriek is een deelatelier waar makers samenkomen, waar ze van elkaar leren, waar ze elkaar inspireren en waar ze natuurlijk ook plezier maken. Volgens mij kan elke buurt over de hele planeet een maakfabriek gebruiken en wel om één simpele reden. Upcycling is de toekomst.
You were once invincible. The dream of a man-made future was clouding your view. Couldn't stop yourself from tugging at the sky, nearly ripping her ozone in two. The heavenly blue has now become a weathered doormat that used to say, "Welcome." How much of paradise did you leave untouched? Was there anywhere left for me to hide from your clutches when even the last remote wilderness is smudged and you expect no repercussions? You woke me from my slumber with your greedy hands, spoiled like a child. You kept screaming demands. More meat and fish, more coffee and spice, more cars and gadgets, and I want to go higher. You just took what you wanted without asking nice and forced your way into my empire. An eye for an eye, and now you require a mask to go shopping for all you desire. You thought you were invincible, and now you think that I locked you down inside your houses, that I cast you into the prison cells that were once your castles, just to cause you pain. You thought you were invincible. It's time you think again. There's an irony in a sleeping bat waking up humanity to its vicious cycle of greed. I may be the virus, yes, but did I cause the disease? If it takes a virus to raise a child, what more would it take for you to seize the opportunity to change your beliefs?
the transformation of the economic model towards a circular and sustainable economic model, including European trade, which is fully aligned with our climate targets. And fourth, the reduction of pollution, and the Minister emphasized chemical pollution. We've also heard from Maria Nera from the World Health Organization. She stressed the need to really ratchet up ambition for the reduction of air pollution, and she made a very clear case that decarbonization has a double benefit for the climate and for health. Now, we would like to hear from a diverse group of stakeholders what their perspectives, their visions, their recommendations are, what needs to be done to chart the path to a healthy planet. We invite all the stakeholders to share with us what they expect and what is it that they want to achieve, what are the meaningful steps that they want to achieve in the coming 3 years to make sure that the European Green Deal delivers on its promises: carbon neutrality, zero pollution, thriving biodiversity, and of course well-being for all. More specifically, what is it that the European governments can do, those governments who will be in the driving seat behind the EU's environmental agenda with the upcoming presidencies, the next trios with France, the Czech Republic and Sweden, and then Spain, Belgium and Hungary. We will also address the EU's global responsibilities and the need for European leadership in finding solutions that work for all. Now let's first have a look at the results of the question that we put to you, to the audience. How do you feel about the European Green Deal 2 years in? When I last looked at the results, I saw that there was a slight majority of people who felt that, well, the European Green Deal hasn't done enough, but it's fixable. It's 59% of you said that. Nearly as many, 52%, said that the European Green Deal has done far too little, but it's fixable. It's just fixable. Basically, nobody thinks that it's too much. Also, very few people think that the European Green Deal as it stands now is just right. And a smaller minority, but still to be considered, think that the European Green Deal is not fixable. So I guess the overall outcome is that most of you have hope, have high expectations, but we need to raise ambition, and we need to make sure that we fill the objectives on paper with real proposals that deliver rapidly. So let me go to our first panelist. Tatjana Stadnik joined Youth and Environment Europe in 2019. She's now the Secretary General of YEE, the largest independent network of youth-led environmental organizations in Europe. Tatjana is originally from Ukraine, where she started her work with young people and therefore also brings in a European perspective beyond the borders of the EU. So Tatjana, what kind of world is it that you would like to inherit? How do European environmental and climate policies, but also policies at member state level, at local government level, have to change to ensure a healthy planet for everyone and everywhere, especially for future generations?
Thank you so much, Patricia, and thank you so much for having me at this panel. When I started my journey in the environmental youth movement, I was 16, and that was almost 10 years ago. And back then, I imagined that by now, Europe would have already acted on what civil society and activists have been asking for decades. I thought that by 2021, Europe would have already drastically cut its emissions, phased out most of the fossil fuels, and was already in full swing implementing the principles of circular economy. That would be called global leadership in the face of the climate crisis. Instead, the EU is currently acting as a sort of a student trying to write their thesis, savoring a sense of accomplishment for setting up a file, which one day is supposed to be the thesis, enjoying life with no sense of urgency, delaying the actual work up until the moment when one can no longer do anything else. They have to sacrifice sleep, social life, survive on fast food, if any food at all, and a harsh dose of adrenaline that keeps them going. One might think that you grow out of this planning fallacy the moment you finish school, but when it comes to the climate crisis, unfortunately, we see politicians not only procrastinating, but also waiting to relay the work onto the younger generation the night before the deadline. The 55% emission reduction target by 2030 is not enough. Every amount of greenhouse gas that is allowed today narrows the remaining options for reducing emissions after 2030. Depleting much of the greenhouse gas emissions budget already by 2030 means that my generation will have to face drastic restrictions after 2030 in order to reach the target of the Paris Agreement. That would impact practically every type of activity because almost all aspects of human life still involves the emissions of greenhouse gases. That would drastically limit human freedoms. And it's not only about my generation, it is about future generation, but also about your generation too. 55% by 2030 reduction target is not enough. We have to act with greater speed and urgency. The fact that the agreement on the 55% reduction target was reached is already a political achievement, but the climate target is still well below the 65% required by the science. As a rich economy, as well as a major historic emitter, the EU should strive for emission reductions of at least 65% by 2030. For that to be achieved, we need all pieces of revised legislation in the Fit for 55 package to go for their maximum of emission. The Member States and the European Parliament have to ensure that the Fit for 55 package becomes fit for 1.5 degrees Celsius to increase our chances to keep the global average temperature rise below the threshold indicated by the science to avoid the climate change impacts incompatible with life on planet. The Fit for 55 package has been a step in the right direction, but it's not enough for the EU to comply with its commitment under the Paris Agreement. We need to make sure that when we say zero pollution action plan, we actually mean zero pollution and not just maintaining the status quo or reducing pollution to levels no longer deemed harmful to human health or ecosystems. There is no truly safe level of exposure to pollution. For instance, aiming at 55% reduction of health impacts from air pollution by 2030 is not the ambition level needed to tackle the leading cause of deaths from environmental pollutions. The EU should swiftly propose the full alignment of its air standards with WHO guidelines and the latest science. Moreover, the EU should urgently end the financial support to polluters and reinforce the application of the polluter pays principle. No amount of EU budget should be used to fund cleanup actions, and no amount of responsibility should be relayed onto taxpayers. Climate change mitigation and adaptation also require better protection of and restoration of biodiversity. Ecosystems such as peatlands, wetlands, floodplains, coastal areas, marine ecosystems, and others can act as natural sinks for carbon dioxide removals and provide solutions for climate adaptation. An ambitious nature restoration law, delivering ecosystems restoration at scale, focusing as a priority on carbon-rich ecosystems, is crucial in delivering the commitments of the European Green Deal. The new restoration law must be targeted and directly actionable to result in large-scale restoration across Europe. It should be additional to the relevant EU directives, habitat, birds, water framework, etc., to reinforce and build upon existing obligations. Restoration of biodiversity is key not only for the climate crisis mitigation, but also for public health and preventing and making us fit against future pandemics. And finally, policies need to take into account social considerations, not only supporting those in need through the Climate Social Fund, but that will be not enough. We need to rethink the way we see economy, break up existing exploitative structures, and stop putting GDP ahead all objectives of EU policies. Even with the EU's target of at least 55% net emission reduction by 2030, teamed up with other pledges from other major emitters, we are still heading towards a global temperature rise of at least 2.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the 21st century. And such a dramatic temperature increase is estimated to cause 8% GDP loss in Europe already by 2050. That means we're already reached the point of no return. We need to steer away from the current destructive economy towards a socially and ecologically just one. And we need to make the economic system independent of growth to allow for reduction in the resources it consumes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tatjana. Well, a determining factor for having the European Green Deal and a major push for seeing environmental and climate policies moving to the core of policy making at the European level have been the young people taking to the streets, to social media, and directly addressing the decision makers. On the 24th of September, the climate strike was back in 1,400 locations around the globe, ahead of COP26 in Glasgow. And just yesterday, we saw around 50,000 people marching the streets here in Brussels. Now, you have delivered or conveyed a sense of urgency. You've been saying the 55% target is not enough. You are saying that this is really limiting the freedoms of future generations. You've been arguing for the 65% target. You also had a very clear message on the zero pollution ambition that, well, there's no truly safe level of any exposure to pollution. And many other of the points that you have referred to will for sure be picked up now during this panel debate. Now, we've heard it many times, what the ambitions behind the European Green Deal are in terms of carbon neutrality by 2050, zero pollution and thriving biodiversity. So with the European Green Deal 2 years in, key policy files have been put on the table now in 2021 and into 2022. We've been talking about the Fit for 55 package, which is meant to curb emissions by 55% by 2030. We've been talking about the Zero Pollution Action Plan, which recognizes that pollution has a very significant impact on health and the environment. And we're all expecting a very ambitious proposal for a new restoration law concerning healthy habitats and biodiversity by the end of the year. So let me invite the next speaker, Veronica Manfredi. She's here to represent the European Commission's DG Environment. She is the Director for Quality of Life, so responsible for air, water and industrial emissions in DG Environment. She has been working for the European Commission on various topics and files. Veronica, how is the EU charting the path to a healthy planet with the European Green Deal 2 years in, 2 years after it was launched? And specifically regarding the pollution crisis that we've been speaking about a lot this morning, what is your vision for progress on the Zero Pollution Action Plan in the second half of the European Green Deal, and what policies are you driving to make a change? Can you please check? Can you try again, Veronica? It's still muted. Yes, let's go to our next guest, and we will bring Veronica back in a minute. So before we hear about the EU's ambitions and the concrete plans for 2022, let's then look at another important level of governance, the cities and the regions, which we've already been talking about with Maria Neira this morning. So while the European level, the European policies, they set the framework and ensure equal standards across the EU 27, ambitious policies and laws have of course to be implemented and realized at member state level, at the regional and local level. So Françoise Bonnet is the Secretary General of ACR+, the Association of Cities and Regions for Sustainable Resource Management, an international network of cities and regions sharing the aim of promoting a sustainable resource management and of accelerating the transition towards a circular economy on their territories and beyond. Françoise, can you tell us what cities and regions in the EU are doing already now to accelerate the transition? Do you have inspiring examples for us on how cities and regions show leadership, for instance, in achieving a non-toxic circular economy or circular economy for climate mitigation? What is the unique role for cities and regions to become a catalyst for change?
Thank you very much. I hope you hear me. Yes, does it work? Wonderful. So thank you for inviting me and to be with you today. And yes, I think that cities and regions are really a key level towards a change and climate mitigation. Why? Because cities are where people live and consume. And of course, when you add the regional level, you can really add also a huge importance of production. And of course, municipalities are the closest to citizens who are also consumers. So we do believe that by promoting as much as possible a territorial hierarchy, so trying to develop activities and to find local solutions as much as possible, it can help in climate mitigation and decreasing our emissions, CO2 emissions. And cities and regions, they have the role to settle up strategies and of course to implement them. And I just think among our members to Brussels, Paris, Pays de la Loire, Scotland, Catalonia or Navarra, who already voted circular economy strategies on their territories and trying, of course, to have measures for their implementation. And among different measures, I think that one of the most important things is, of course, boosting circular production and consumption through public procurement, for example, or also by promoting eco-design through competitions like in Catalonia. But what is also an important sector is the food sector. It was already mentioned before. And so we have a lot of local policies pushing for good food for everybody. So starting from promoting urban farming and home production or at least neighborhood production of food, but also trying to promote composting, neighborhood composting and home composting, and of course having the right solution for organic fraction treatment, so the waste, the organic waste treatment. And just to give you a little example linking to air pollution, several years ago already, the little city of Besançon in France decided to promote home composting and neighborhood composting in order to decrease the quantity of organic waste sent to incineration, in order to decrease the capacity of the incineration, and so like that to have less incinerated waste and more return to the soil for the organic waste. And it worked. I think that also an important role for local and regional authorities is, of course, to promote the best solution, thinking about prevention, so having a sustainable consumption by prevention of our material resources use, reusing, recycling, using for that local and economic local legal and economic instrument like local taxes against, decreasing landfill and incineration, but also by local subsidies, promoting and boosting startups and local production, startups with new activities like leasing, so the economy of functionality in order to lasting more and more the product we put on the market. And of course, public authorities, they have a role of exemplarity. And in the building sector, it's a huge role to play in that. Not only for the energy part of buildings and new construction, but also trying more and more to boost cradle-to-cradle approach in new buildings. And in our members, you have already very good example in applying this approach. And last but not least, I would like to repeat the role of public authorities at local level of raising public awareness. And I would like to come back to the speech of the French minister. If I noted well, they gave us 4 priorities. The first one was boost the decarbonization of our economy and acceleration of our economic model. And I would like to stress the point on the fact that the two are linked. And with our More Circularity, Less Carbon campaign launched 2 years ago and a half, we try to give indicators and instruments to local authorities to show to the population that by having a sustainable consumption and production, so a sustainable behavior in our territories, we can really decrease our indirect emissions and also direct emissions, and like that contribute to climate mitigation. And linking that, I would like to give you some example in terms of non-toxic circular economy example. I was just discussing last week with Amsterdam and the area of Amsterdam, trying to have a comprehensive textile initiative in order to promote more and more sustainable textile on their territory and behind, because you know that with textile we can really decrease, and I mean sustainable production of textile, we can really decrease our CO2 emissions. And we have also to think about the microplastics that pollution occurred by the use of a certain textile. Of course, other non-toxic circular economy topic are plastics, and maybe less known example is the tires. You know that an important microplastic pollution is due to tire erosion on our roads. And so now there is a coalition to put together different stakeholders in order to see how to tackle this issue. And of course, non-toxic circular economy also is concerned by our way to produce food and to consume food. So yes, I think that with decentralized authorities trying to put together different local stakeholders to boost local economy and trying to boost and to promote sustainable product on their territory in order to have a good consumption and consumption behavior, it really helped to have a decarbonized territory.
Thank you very much, Françoise, for this wealth of examples. Let's see if we can reconnect with Veronica Manfredi to hear from the European level how the EU is creating the framework in which then these great initiatives can thrive. So do we have a connection to Veronica now? Not yet. Okay, we'll try again later. So we'll then move and go back to the French government. We have with us Francesco Gaeta. He's a director in the French Ministry for the Ecological Transition. So we've heard it this morning from the minister. We know that the French Council presidency will have a lot on its plate. The minister has outlined the 4 priorities, making sure that the Council adopts ambitious positions around the Fit for 55 package is for sure one of them. Next to the carbon neutrality objective, we have been discussing the zero pollution ambition this morning and the need to chart the path to a healthy planet. So what does the French presidency intend to do to ensure strong positions in the Council on key files such as the Zero Pollution Action Plan? And also, what do you need from the other stakeholders, the other member states, the member state governments, business, civil society, to make your plans for 2022 a success?
Good morning, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's really a pleasure for me to be with you today and to speak about the French presidency for coming. It's our current job, day-by-day job, so it's interesting for me to exchange on that. In particular, because the minister this morning was very clear on our priorities, and she quoted that the fight against pollution is one of our main priorities for the French presidency. As a matter of fact, beyond the French presidency, France is very committed on this issue. First of all, on national level, with the adoption of a very ambitious legislation that we are put in place now. And then at European level, as you know, we are member of an important coalition called Reach Up. This coalition is very committed to pushing forward the position in the Council and in Europe on these issues. If I had to synthesize what is our approach, is completely based on the notion of One Health. One Health is the I would say, the notion saying that our health is totally linked to the health of the environment and the preservation of biodiversity. That's why we consider that the only way to face these issues is to reduce the pollution at the source. And that's why we are quite supportive of European strategy on zero pollution, and would seize the opportunity, because I've seen that Veronica Manfredi is here, to thank again the Commission for the excellent work on this, because it is a very important basis for next jobs in the Council and the Parliament. What are our expectations as France and presidency at the same time? We have some issues on that we really would like that the European Union can go forward. First of all is the definition of endocrine disruptors that can be used in all the frameworks, a sort of transversal definition in order to get rid of them towards zero pollution and through all the legislation that we have on the table. The second one is that we really want to withdraw from the market the most dangerous substances. Then we would like also, and we push for the end of the export of chemical substances which are already banned in EU, because this is completely contradictory. We are fighting against the massive use of pesticides and want to reduce it, and also to strengthen the resources of the European agency in order to make them able to produce report and analysis that can be at the basis of our decisions at legislative level. Then we would like to improve the financial parts of our legislation in Europe, in particular by establishing taxes on mineral and nitrogen fertilizers to fight against air pollution. And also we wait for a global strategy on soils, which are a major issue to prevent pollution, and also to make an end to plastic pollution in seas by 2025. So these are our expectations, and we will see what we will be able to have to discuss. At the moment, our project for the French presidency are to push forward the I would say the common position of the Council towards an ambition. We won't have enough material at the legislative level. We will see what Monica Manfredi will say, but Veronica Manfredi will say. But if there are on the table sufficiently early legislative proposals that we can deal with, we will do that. Anyway, we have foreseen to put this issue on the table of discussion, informal discussion at several high-level events under our presidency, in order to put together legislators, European Commissions, and civil societies, in particular ONGs, to make sure that we can progress on a common ambition positions at European level in order to facilitate not only in our presidency but also in following one the adoption of very strong legislation in this domain. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Francesco Gaeta, for providing even more detail to the priorities outlined this morning by the Minister, and for adding a couple of more items to the table for our discussion this morning. Thank you also for explaining the commitment to the One Health approach, so the approach that the health of people, animals and the environment is extremely closely linked, and that needs action at local, national and global level. So I'm sure we'll come back to some of the points that you have highlighted. let me move to one of our other civil society speakers on the panel this morning. So we've been discussing already that the environmental crises that we're facing in the EU are of course not isolated from the rest of the world. Emissions obviously have global impacts, so has climate change. Pollution travels across borders. So we know that it is a few economies that have made the biggest contributions in terms of CO2 emissions historically and today. Some of the 10 biggest emitters have made new pledges. The EU is one of them. Canada, the UK and the US. Russia will allow for emissions to rise. China and India still have to make new pledges. Brazil, Indonesia and Japan do not improve on previous pledges. So I would like to now discuss with Asad Rahman. He's the director of The War on Want, a UK-based NGO seeking to put an end to poverty and to injustice globally. Asad has also been fighting for global justice for 25 years, but also as Friends of the Earth UK's international climate campaigner. So he brings in a lot of expertise on the global climate justice discussion. Well, we've heard it this morning. We have 3 more years to make the European Green Deal deliver on its promises with this current Commission, this current Parliament. The deal may not be as ambitious enough in some of the areas, including the 55% reduction target, and action is not yet fast enough. At the same time, it's also a very unique policy framework if we compare to other main emitters around the globe. So, Asad, what do you think? Is Europe doing enough to ensure a clean environment and health for everyone on this planet? What do you expect from Europe in the coming 3 years to ensure climate and environmental justice?
Thank you, and thank you again for the kind invitation to join you today. One of the other things that we do is we help coordinate a network around what a truly transformative global Green New Deal would look like. Listening to the previous speakers, I was just reminded of the words of the Secretary General of the UN, who said last year, COVID is exposing fallacies and falsehoods everywhere. The lie that free markets can deliver healthcare for all, the fiction that unpaid care work is not work, the delusion that we live in a post-racist world, and the myth that we're in the same boat. He could have, of course, gone on to say that the claim uttered by the richest countries in the world in the midst of the pandemic, that no one is safe until we're all safe, will ring us hollow because of the COVID vaccine apartheid as the unmet commitments to address the multiple crises facing many of the global south. And I think there is a question that must sit at the heart of all policy responses, which is, how do we guarantee and deliver the universal truth that every citizen of the world has a right to a dignified life? Now, without doubt, there is increasingly widespread recognition about the multitude and the magnitude of these multiple crises facing humanity, and they clearly have dwarfed anything we've previously faced in human history. But I find it fascinating that they sit alongside what I would term a continuing cognitive dissonance about both the scale and urgency and ambition of the action that's needed. So our starting point, of course, is we all recognise we live in a world which is driven by deep imbalances of power, many of them generated by historical injustices of recognition, distribution and exclusion. And these systems, of course, are entrenched over time. So over time, we're not equal, neither in our exposure to injustice nor in our capacity to address it. What is interesting, I find, is whilst the policy agendas of the EU and other international institutions in the global north now seem to be shaping around this, whether it's the Green New Deal or Build Back Better or Just Transition, and that they've been promoted as addressing both the climate crisis and the crisis of economic inequality, the real question remains, are these proposals fair? Are they just? And what do they mean for the majority of the world's citizens? And for those of us working on a framework of a global Green New Deal, which situates itself on the realities of the front lines of injustice rather than the capitals of power and what is pragmatically possible, I think we have to look at this through 4 critical tests, and uphold all proposals, including the European Union's Green New Deal. Does it meet the goal of limiting temperatures to below 1.5 with absolutely everybody doing their fair share of effort? Does it tackle economic inequality by ensuring everyone has a living wage, workers' rights, social protection, access to free and universal public services? And does it put well-being and the right of everyone to thrive in balance with planetary limits ahead of unsustainable growth and extraction of resources? You know, and have policies in place such as around public goods, such as energy and food, to make them a fundamental right for all, equitably shared, and not simply for corporate profit. And also importantly, does it recognise that we need to undo this embedded systems of injustice, whether that's racism, patriarchy, or economic, that have just become embedded into our global economic and political systems? So we go beyond a circular economy to a circular world where financial flows scale commensurate with need, without conditionalities, where technology is needed for the transition and not subject to either TRIPS or unfair trade rules. And also recognises, of course, that the capacity of the richest countries has been built on the extraction of resources and exploitation of people in the global south. And we don't have time here, but we could go on and speak for a long time about an arc that connects everything from slavery and colonialism to today's economic wealth. And here, of course, with this learning audience, I don't need to spend time setting out the climate case. But what is interesting is, whilst the goal of limiting temperatures to 1.5 degrees, as set out in the Paris Agreement, is repeated ad nauseum, it sits at the centre of the European Green New Deal. We know, of course, as the latest UN report says, we're still heading for a warming of 2.7% with global emissions increasing. I actually find that the conversation around the actual carbon budget for 1.5 seems to be either willfully ignored or relies on real fantasy accounting and unproven technologies and risky technologies around the net zero 2050 goal. Look, it's important to state, when we think about the carbon budget, and historical emissions obviously matter, as it's the cumulative emissions that led us to a warming of 1.2. We've collectively emitted 2.5 billion tons since 2,500 billion tons since 1850. It leaves us less than 500 gigatons of CO2 for the remaining carbon budget of 1.5. It's estimated by the end of 2021, we'll have burnt through 89% of that budget for a 2 in 3 chance of meeting the 1.5 degree guardrail. And let's just dwell on that for a second. That means that there's a 1 in 3 chance that we'll breach the 1.5 degree guardrail. And recognizing no temperature is safe and it's deadly for many, we all know that breaching that begins the spiral into runaway climate change that will dwarf the killer floods, fires and famines that we can see wreaking havoc and destroying people's lives and livelihoods. And I find it really interesting that no policymaker in the global north would countenance any public policy for their citizens that included that level of risk. Neither would any of us who are on this call today would board a bus or a train if they were told that it had a 1 in 3 chance of crashing. But that is what public policy in the global north is being prefaced on. Secondly, whilst we all know that the richest countries in the world, those most responsible, have the most capacity to act and the legal obligation, what's fascinating is these plans for what I would call capturing the remaining carbon budget. It's a modern form of carbon colonialism. You're pushing for more loopholes through offsets and carbon markets. And we seem to have moved from what was an era of climate denialism to an era of mitigation denialism, with targets being pushed towards 2050, when we know that the requirements of both science and justice is for fair share, is for rich countries like the European Union and others to do real zero targets by 2030. And just to give you an illustration, as Warren, what we've worked with Stockholm Environment Institute and others to do a calculation of what the UK's fair share would be. And a calculation of that would be, it would be minus 200% by 2030. So not only would it need to be at real zero and decarbonize, but it would need to provide comparable effort to support less well-off countries and finance, and so that they can grow cleanly. And the scale of finance, UNCTAD has said we need at least 1.4 trillion a year for the next decade. That's been similar figures have been put forward by climate scientists, and yet the scale of the external support, for example, purely on climate, is an unmet promise of 100 billion that largely relies on loans and recycling of other aid commitments. So what, for me, the most important things is not what the targets that are announced, is what are the plans and policies behind them? And it feels like tough talk on climate is now the go-to place, but whilst continuing, of course, the same policies, fossil fuel subsidies, locking in new fossil fuel infrastructure, as the EU is doing, even as the IEA categorically states no new gas, oil or coal expansion is possible under the 1.5 degree guardrail. Financial institutions, both public, EU and private, continue to provide financial oxygen to the industry, and policymakers, particularly in the global north, continue with what we say is a sort of do what I say, not what I do, to the rest of the world. And the realities of the COVID pandemic, which have exposed these structural inequalities and injustices, both within our own societies in the global north, and we all know that low-paid and poorer communities paid the heavy price, but it also starkly exposed those between societies in the north and south. And what's interesting is, whilst many countries in the richest parts of the world threw away the economic rule book and they imposed on others, they directly intervened in their economies, those very same tools and financial means are, of course, denied to many countries in the global south. And even today, close to 80% of the IMF loans given to the poorest countries to deal with the pandemic require future austerity cuts, at the very same time as we know that it's been the decades of structural adjustment programs, unsustainable debt payments that have denied the policy space and tools to invest in the very systems, health, social protection, public services, which have been critical, not just meeting the pandemic, but are the key adaptive tools to address climate inequality. And if I have a couple of minutes, I just want to say something also about the importance of tackling inequality. Look, we all know that it's a huge challenge within rich countries, but it's also between the richest and the majority of the world. And we, of course, face this dichotomy. We have a world of great abundance, yet half the world still struggles to live on the equivalent of $5.50 a day. We have half the world without access to electricity or clean cooking, close to 2 billion people facing issues of hunger. And of course, that's comparable with lacking housing, health, education. Global inequality isn't getting better, it's actually getting worse. And if the responses of rich countries is devised around competitiveness and a new expansion of resource use, from green metals and minerals to new metal mining, that some estimate we'll see a doubling of current resource extraction, when we know that the sustainable use of our planet's materials requires a massive reduction. The answer simply won't be found in electric batteries or even in a circular economy, but actually in a circular world. And that requires, I think, a much more a politics that isn't shaped by a lack of imagination and ambition, or the same repeating of the same sort of failed and deadly approaches, which have created this uneven and broken world that we inherit. I think it requires a vision of international and solidarity, which I see largely missing in the EU's plans.
Thank you very much, Assad, for these very clear words and outlining your vision of a transformative global Green New Deal. Well, you mentioned it very briefly towards the end of your intervention, that also, of course, if we look within our region, if we look within Europe, health impacts, environmental impacts are not equally distributed between everybody equally. So do you think that if we look at the current Green Deal policies, do you think we're doing enough to make sure that the costs of the transition will not burden those who are already struggling in our societies? If you have a brief insight on that.
No, we are not, and it shows a lack of joined up policies. Here in the UK at this very moment, for example, we have a situation where we know we have a pandemic which has pushed millions more people into poverty. We have about 2.7 million people relying on food banks. We have 4 out of 10 people who are in work poverty. They require that work is not paying enough for them to be able to make ends meet. We now see an increase in energy prices. We see a number of different issues all at play. And the response to these is not joined up. You would think that the immediate response would be to think about both, how are we tackling energy poverty by rolling out a massive wave of retrofitting of homes, of energy efficiency? How do we also at the same time look to reduce inequality by ensuring that it's not the poorest communities who are hit hardest in their pockets. Because both from a moral point of view, but also from a political point of view, without the social license of communities buying into the transition, we know that we will not have the political legitimacy to deliver the kind of rapid transition that is needed. And that's been played out, of course, in every single country across Europe. We've seen the realities of a decade of austerity. It's pushed some of the poorest parts of our society deeper and deeper into inequality and poverty. And unless we are centering and ensuring that the green transition is not only transitioning in terms of on climate, but addressing the critical issue of inequality and injustice within our societies, we're not going to be able to deliver the transition that is needed.
Thanks a lot, Assad. So unfortunately, I understand that Veronica Manfredi has a technical problem and she won't be able to join us this morning. So at this stage in the discussion, I would have asked her what the European Commission's learnings are from the COVID crisis and this kind of display of inequalities and the inequalities that have deepened in our societies due to the pandemic, and what the Commission's takeaway is to put well-being and health higher up on the political agenda. We know that DG Environment and the other DGs are currently working on mainstreaming equality issues into the diverse policy areas. So that would have been very interesting here to explore with DG Environment, and we'll do that on another occasion. So, but I also know that we can discuss that question with Francesco Gaeta. Well, the Minister has already mentioned it this morning. She said it right at the beginning of her intervention that climate action and our social objectives can only be thought together. Now, Francesco, France has had its very own experience with the Yellow Vests, which has shown the need for a just transition and to ensure buy-in from the whole of society. Now, the EU has adopted the Just Transition Fund. It's targeted at economic diversification and reconversion, and research and innovation, and reskilling workers in the most affected areas. Then there's also the Social Climate Fund, which is meant to finance temporary direct income for those households and to support measures and investments to reduce emissions in road transport and the building sectors, and to make that possible for the low-income households. So, Francesco, do you think that these measures at the European level are enough to make the transition just? Or is there anything else that we need to do?
Thank you very much for this question. It's true that we have a huge experience on what it means when the transition is not necessarily understood as just. And that's why for us is a major challenge in the implementation of Fit for 55. There will be no change if the transformation is not supported by all society. In my opinion, there are two dimensions in that. First of all, that's clear, and you said it, we should avoid that part of our population is left behind, what we call the losers of transition. The second point, and this is also very important, is that we should make sure that all the layers of the society contribute with commitment to the change. And if we consider that these two dimensions are right, then we cannot limit the discussion only on two specific funds that are limited in action. I think in particular to the just transition. As you know, the just transition concern only limited territories, or the new proposed social climate fund, which cover also limited public. We should consider that investment in transition is a transversal global issue for European Union and for member states, which means concretely that the European budget on one side, the recovery funds on the other side, the national investment funds are used to underpin the transition towards a new society decarbonized, suitable, and very fast transformed. This is for public funds, but then you have the private funds, which are also a key issue to orient the investments. And we see this issue with the taxonomy discussions and taxonomy regulation, how it is important that towards the private investments, we arrive to reconcile the issue of the profits with the transformation of our society. Behind the funds, there are the approaches at national European level, because the society that we wish for tomorrow has to be prepared today, which means that the investments are to be done today in the right directions, and also training has to be, I would say, be more suitable for the society that we are preparing for tomorrow. The last point is that if we don't want that anybody is behind, as we said at the beginning, and we want that everybody is committed in pushing for the new world, it must be clear that investing in transition is a good affair for everybody. And we have, I think, a good example today, which is the proposed regulation on battery. Because if you look at that, you have on one side the clear idea to how to reduce our ecological footprint. And on the other side, we do that creating conditions of our technological sovereignty, which means that at the same time, we are creating and protecting our jobs, creating the conditions of the welfare of tomorrow, while pushing for more ecological friendly world. So my opinion is that, as you understand, funds are not enough. All the system has to be oriented towards the transition.
Thank you very much, Francesco. Well, let's go back to Françoise and the level of the cities and regions. So we've been talking about now the fact that some groups in our cities and regions are disproportionately affected by pollution and other environmental burdens. The European Environmental Agency has shown how low-income groups are more exposed to pollution while having less access to green spaces. We've also talked about this morning with Maria Nera. Now, the EEB has recently exposed many situations of environmental discrimination, for instance, against Roma communities across cities and municipalities in the region. Another example is our mobility concepts that are not sufficiently accessible, for instance, to people with reduced mobility, or that are not sufficiently attractive for women. So how can cities and regions drive a just transition that benefits everybody equally? And what are cities doing to make sure that nobody is left behind?
Thank you to give me the floor again on this very important topic. And I would like also to come back to this social aspect and inequality, just to give you a little bit my thought also. When we started thinking more and more and discussing more and more about circular economy and transition of our system, we saw a lot of big companies going through this new concept, and we were a little bit afraid representing public authorities and of course the general interest. So not only the economy, but we have three pillars. So of course also environment, but also the social pillar. And where you see that at the beginning, circular economy could be understood as a cost efficiency. It's not enough at all. Of course, we have the environmental aspects and the social aspects, and I think that the Yellow Vest movement showed clearly that all the policies should be inclusive with all these aspects. And I can also agree on the fact that funds are not enough. We have to think about this aspect everywhere. And so at local level, of course, we can do something. And especially with this transition towards a more sustainable economy. So circular economy should be sustainable. We can promote local economy and low income low qualified jobs that can help those part of the population who are not always included. And of course, there is a big problem on that. At that local level, again, with public procurement, we can also do the difference by putting certain criteria in order to have equality, for example, gender equality regarding salaries, etc. When you subcontract for doing a certain works, or of course with public transport and having differentiated tariff towards those communities. So I really think that at local level we can make examples, good examples, in order to upscale this problem, this issue that should have to be tackled at a very global level. So yes, we have instruments also at local level. It won't do everything, but it can help, and especially with those local taxes, you can differentiate taxes towards household incomes, transport policies, building policies. Also, you can have social housing with very good performances that can help in reducing your electricity bills and heating bills. So we need to have ambitions in this kind of policies towards inequalities. So we have already good examples, and I was thinking about, for example, Pamplona, who has a very precise guidelines on public procurement and how to tackle those issues in public procurements. And it's really an important driver for local authorities.
Thank you very much, Françoise. I would also like to hear from Tatiana what her thoughts are on the discussion on, well, on the one hand, delivering on our environmental and climate objectives, and at the same time ensuring it's a just transition. So Tatiana, we've just heard from Francesco Gaeta, who said, well, just transition is not just about funds, it's also about deeper systemic change that needs to ensure justice. Looking at the social justice aspect and from a perspective of young people who in our region and across the EU are kind of overrepresented in low-income groups who suffer most from unemployment and lack of opportunities. So what is your take on the discussion around a just transition, and what more is needed apart from the instruments that have already been presented?
Well, absolutely. When it comes to the just transition, we talk about it all the time in the youth movement, that at the moment, the youth movement is unfortunately very much white, middle class, privileged, because the young people who are coming from those marginalized groups and who have lower opportunities, they do not have the capacity or the opportunity for the privilege of volunteering to spend their free time doing the work that we're doing in the youth movement at the moment. We are trying to build up the narrative of needing a large shift and not just incremental steps towards making the just transition. And it has already been said when it comes to the priorities for the French presidency, the legislations that there will be focus on the zero pollution ambition. I would also like to ask once again to take the freedoms of the future generations seriously and urgently raised ambitions. And for example, an upcoming opportunity for the French presidency lies in the fact that France will hold the EU presidency in the first half of 2022, when the co-design process towards the new EU nature restoration law will start. And it's crucial to ensure French support for an ambitious restoration law to make sure France will put their political weight behind an ambitious position. And when it comes to what is further needed for the just transition and for young people, for instance, to engage more into the processes that we have been discussing, I will mention one thing that keeps coming up in every meeting, every discussion with other youth movements, groups, and networks. And this one thing, it's something that can be done already next week. The youth movement has gained momentum through climate strikes, but this is not enough. Now we need resource to work towards concrete policy change. There is already available funding being channeled towards environmental action. And for example, I'm now relying on the European Foundation Center report on environmental funding by European foundations. In 2018, 127 European foundations already made 5,000 environmental grants worth a combined 700 million. And no, this is not sufficient for the environmental and climate action, but this is the funding which is already available. But only a fraction is being channeled towards youth-led projects. And we see time and time again adult organizations being funded to work with young people instead of funding youth-led organizations directly. We are grateful to those who are already supporting young people directly, but that's just a fraction of what is possible. And time again, governments, private donors, foundations, funded adult NGOs reach out to us because they want to work with us, but they expect us to meaningfully engage into environmental matters, understand the legislation, follow the negotiation processes, participate in the decision-making processes, organize and attend meetings, write policy papers, create social media content, disseminate knowledge in ways that our peers would listen, mobilize hundreds of young people in our free time for a fraction of funding that would not cover one person's living expense. And while doing that, you dare be less inspiring than Greta. This is something that I've actually heard. Meanwhile, young people are also expected to get their education, build careers, pay their rents, maintain healthy relationships, work-life balance, support their families, and perhaps build fair families of their own while staying sane in the face of the climate crisis. And through channeling the funding, and I'm talking about the funding that is already available to the youth-led organizations, you give us a chance for intergenerational equity. You're giving a chance to those young people who cannot afford the privilege to volunteer, those young people whose lives are directly already being the most affected by the climate crisis, a chance to have their voices heard. We don't need yet another webinar or toolkit done by adults for young people, and absolutely no further awareness raising on how young people can decrease their own carbon footprint. No. What we need is direct long-term investment, and please do not lose the chance to invest into younger generation directly. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Tatiana. Now we have quite some questions from the audience, and we'll go into these in a minute. So just to remind you to share your thoughts on social media, #EB21. And there's also another question on HowSpace that we have asked you. It's about, well, if we all know what needs to be done, what is it actually that hinders us and all the stakeholders from speeding up the transition? So share your opinion with us, and we'll get back to the results after the panel debate. So I'm looking at the questions here from the audience. So there's two more questions which touch upon the international responsibility of the EU. So I'll start with these first. Assad, I'd like to get back to you. There's a question from Deborah. She is saying, how do we actually build the international solidarity that we need? How do we build it quickly in an increasingly fractured world where our only chance in meeting what we want to achieve and meeting our climate and diversity targets is actually, I mean, we can only do that through actually working together. So what is your advice on building international solidarity?
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like the very moment that we need more global solidarity, more global cooperation, the world is dominated by a politics which is retreating behind walls and fences, rise of nationalism, right-wing populism, etc. And it feels like, how do we shift the dial, right? But that's, I think, this true of how do we shift the dial in multilateral institutions. We know that, you know, what's missing is is political will, and political will is, of course, tied to our political power as individual citizens and collectively as active citizens. And there is a wider question, of course, about the democratic deficit that exists. That means that, we still have political systems which overwhelmingly are influenced and shaped by decision makers and policy makers who listen more to big business, corporations, and etc. in their interests than the people, and that's created a sense of disconnecting to the political system, of people feel either apathetic or feeling disillusioned with it and feeling it can't be done. But we can move the dial very, very rapidly. And I totally agree with everything that Tatiana said. I mean, if you just think about how fast the dial has been moved, just even in the last few years, through everything from the youth climate strikers to the work that's been done over decades by climate justice groups in the global south about centering the climate reality. We know this from the 1970s onwards, but in the last few years, we've seen a massive shift. And so that transition can happen very, very rapidly, and it can happen very, very quickly, as long as we are both working, I think, at the local and global level. Now, at the global level, there's a big question, are our multilateral institutions fit for purpose? Do we need to be looking beyond, institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, and the WTO to a new kind of multilateral structure that would deliver a global just transition, that would ensure that we don't have the discussions taking place in the climate negotiations being undermined by discussions taking place at the WTO, undemocratic spaces like the IMF and World Bank designing policies that don't meet the climate targets or don't meet imperatives of tackling inequality, which are divorced from the realities of the discussions around protection of our ecosystems and nature. So it does require a more joined up thinking. And of course, many of us thought, well, that's would the SDG 2030 would provide. Of course, what's lacking there is the means of implementation. And that, I think, is the really thorny issue, is in terms of this question about the finance and technologies that are needed. How do we address that? Well, ultimately, it's our responsibility, right? We are the ones. Nobody's going to come and change the world. Nobody's going to come and save us apart from ourselves. And so the first and foremost is we have to build our collective power. Wherever we are, in whatever organization or institution, they have to build that power. And that means centering the global as well as the local and national, and making sure that our policies speak to the requirements at a global level and not simply shaped by what we think is politically pragmatic within our domestic context.
Thank you, Assad. So there's another question which is linked to our global responsibility, and I'd like to ask it to Francesco Gaeta. So there's a question from Andra Phillips, who's asking, how can the EU's next presidencies extend stronger pressure on other developed countries that are dragging their feet and that allow for poor examples, such as Australia, that's not reducing its reliance on coal, and the coal sales damaging the Great Barrier Reef. I mean, obviously, there's other examples. So, what can the EU and especially the presidencies do to put more pressure on our peers?
Thank you very much. This question is quite related to the previous one, and that's true that we cannot consider that once the European Union has adopted all the legislation on Fit for 55, restoration that was mentioned by our young colleague, it's okay, because at the European level would be enough to fight against climate change and pollution. This is not true at all, and we know it. We are very small compared to the dimension of the problems, and this implies that we have to use our legislation, our strong position at the European level, to be ready and to be able to change in the world I would say the attitude and the politics that are made. There are several possibilities to do that. One of them is one of our priorities is to use the commercial policy to influence the politics in our counterparts, economical counterparts. This is a very strong instrument and we are really supportive of commercial agreements, international commercial agreements that include specific clauses with regards to the respect of the Paris Agreement for climate, but also what we call the mirror clauses, which are the respect of a certain number of environmental legislation, environmental standards that we apply in Europe and we need to be applied elsewhere if we have to exchange products. This is a very strong instrument, and we push very, very, very strong for that, enlarging what we call the mirror clauses. This is only the way we are working today with the European Commission and the other member states on the issues of deforestation. Is a good example, in my opinion. The only way, one of the major, I would say, instrument that we have, the only way to reduce deforestation is an enormous issue for climate and biodiversity, is to avoid that European Union can import products, commodities, which are at the beginning one of the reasons of deforestation. And we are working strongly with the Commission to have a legislation allowing the public policies to influence the attitude of the enterprises. So I agree totally with the idea that we have instruments to do that, and we are able to make a change if we are conscious that we are strong in the world as European Union, and we can really influence the others when we, in particular, work on the agreements with the other states. And we will see how it will work, because we will have at the international level two major events close to today. First of all, we will have the COP26 on climate change, and we will see at what level we will be able to influence the ambition of commitments of other states. We did the job at the European level, but now it's clear that it's not enough to reduce emissions in Europe when others don't do that. We mentioned Australia with the coal, but we can consider other states, as you know, that are very polluting. And what is expected from us is to be, I would say, able to show our commitments not only in reducing emission, but also to support other states with financial instruments. And then in COP15 for biodiversity, we will have to build a new framework for protecting biodiversity, where also it won't be enough to show our availability to engage. We also need to show how we will support other states to make the same commitments that we have done. So European Union is an answer to the change that we need at the international level. When European Union is ambitious in its own legislation, clear in the relations with the other states, and ready to support the efforts of other states. I think these are the three major key points that can make European Union really efficient at the international level.
Thank you, Francesco. Well, after having talked about the EU's, the need for EU leadership at the international level, there is another question which brings us back to what the regional level and also the cities need. So there's a comment or a question from Frédéric, who's saying that, well, it's true that the promotion of sustainable solutions at the local level is a key part of success. but what can be done, what must be done, so that the ambitions, so that the national strategies can build on kind of these ambitions effectively. And what is it that the national and regional levels need from the EU to become that key part of the solution? And I would like to link that question to a more specific topic that you, Françoise, have already mentioned. You have been talking about the building sector, which of course is one of the key sectors that we need to tackle in terms of, coming to carbon neutrality, but also in achieving a circular economy. So maybe you can also elaborate a little bit more. When we look at the building sector, where we know that we can save up to 2/3 of the current energy demands by 2050, we have several policies now in place that are meant to contribute to this. The Social Climate Fund, eco-design, of course, and also the restoration wave. So what is it that the cities and regions need to contribute to the energy efficiency principle in the building sector?
Thank you. A lot of questions, huge topic also. I'm not sure I will be able to answer to everything in details, but I think that first of all, regions must to be listened. And you know that within the EU, we have different performances among the regions. And when we report to the Commission, it's always at national level. So I think that it's really important to look at also the regional level in order to be able to give the right instrument and the right finance and funds to the country, because you know better than me that when you look at, for example, Italy or Spain or other countries, when you speak about the north or the south, you do not have the same performances and maybe not the same needs neither. So I think that at EU level, it's really important to have it in mind and to have a more detailed or more in-depth, more local eyes to what have to be done. Regarding the building sectors, I think that of course we have already mainly at regional level more than maybe at city level. It depends, of course, on the member states and how your administrative competencies are.
Okay, it seems we have lost Françoise for a minute, so maybe we can come back to her once the connection is re-established. So I have another question for Francesco Gaeta about the upcoming REACH and the pesticides regulation. So the question here is, well, first, the comment is that these two policy documents or instruments are, of course, crucial for the EU to ensure its legislation is up to date with the latest science and ensure sufficient levels of protection for people and the environment. Now, you've already spoken about the topic of pesticides, highly hazardous pesticides. You also mentioned the problem of these pesticides being exported and still being used in other parts of the world while they're still they're already banned within the EU. Now, this question is about the changes also within the EU to ensure sufficient levels of protection. So when we look at the important changes needed in REACH to restrict toxic chemicals in consumer products, which is a commitment in the chemical strategy, how will the French presidency ensure that through this regulatory review we lead the EU towards very high levels of ambition and that we introduce the new vision for toxic-free products, which also links back to Tatiana's initial statement that, well, zero pollution is really about zero pollution, because it's not about just putting up higher limits. So what do we do to get to toxic-free consumer products, Francesco?
Yes, thank you very much for these questions, which is important because I had the opportunity at my previous intervention to insist on the importance of the implementation of this strategy. The key issue is the I would say the implementation, transversal implementation of the principle of precaution, which is fundamental, which means that we don't put on the market any product that is not clearly without risk. That's the meaning. And to be able to do that, I mean, to be able to be confident on the quality of the product and the fact that these products are without risk, we need essentially to dispose, to have on the table clear elements from the companies. You know that the when you judge of the the quality of a product, the impact of a product, you need to dispose of the elements made by tests in laboratory, tests in real terms, and for that it is essential that we improve the quality of the dossier which are presented by companies. This is the first thing. Otherwise, we are not able to check. And the second one, I told it, we need that the agencies are more capable to foreseeing ongoing the test and to reevaluate the elements which are done by the companies. This system has to be improved in order to be sure that we are going to approve products, substances which are not harmful for our health. And this is very essential. That's why we are so, we have so many expectations towards the REACH regulation review.
Thank you, Francesco. So I think we have Françoise back. So Françoise, you get another opportunity to answer to the previous questions about, especially about the building sector and what needs to be done to support cities and regions in getting to higher levels of energy efficiency. And more generally, is there kind of another final message that you have for us? What you need from the perspective of the cities and regions to play your part in the transition?
Thank you. I hope I won't be lost again. I think that we have already very good practices at regional and local level and municipal level to have this sustainable building policy implemented regarding energy efficiency, and also behind. I mean, also, as I mentioned before, the cradle-to-cradle policy and strategy. So I think that just duplicating a little bit what has been done already in other regions, I think just about, for example, Brussels, but you have also other examples, and also in the north of Europe, where really there is a strong regional policy trying to give incentives to citizens who want to repair and restore their houses in certain way, showing the example with new buildings, public buildings, passive buildings, etc. We have huge of examples, and I think that now it's just a question of scaling up the best practices. And for that, I think that at EU level, we should collaborate more between the different decision levels, and also capitalize on what has been done already, not invent the wheel already, because we know that some practice really give strong results. So just helping regions where it's more difficult, financially speaking, or with capacity building, to duplicate this kind of practices should help a lot.
Thanks a lot, Françoise. So I will have one final question for each of the other panelists, or also give you the opportunity to kind of sum up the discussion from your point of view, if you have any other final message that you want to share with us. So I'll quickly go back to Francesco, because it's also related to a question we got, and then I'll give the floor again to Assad and Tatjana also for a concluding remark or your takeaways from this morning's discussion. So Francesco, feel free to comment on any of the other topics that the colleagues have touched upon, but I would still like to ask you about the question of the direction of where the EU's spending should be going. So the question of finance for sustainability. We've heard this morning that we still have issues around not just fossil fuel subsidies, but also other kinds of investments and money going into creating new lock-ins. We have heard that funding needs to go into the just transition. Of course, it needs to go into buildings. It needs to go into youth engagement. We heard. So maybe in your final comment, if you also would like to comment on your vision and your government's vision on the future direction of spending. Of course, we still have the ongoing debate on the taxonomy for sustainable finance. We will also have to look into how the national plans under the recovery and resilience facility are actually being implemented. We already have signs that while most of the governments are spending a part of the funds on climate action, they're also spending it on investments that actually undermine our climate and other environmental objectives. So of course the follow-up of these plans, of their implementation, will also be important in 2022. So maybe you also want to comment on that in your final intervention, Francesco.
Yes, thank you. I have only one comment on that. I think that everybody should consider that all the finance investments should be under the principle of do not harm. That's the rule for me. And once we are okay on this principle, then it will be easier. In particular, with regards to the discussion we have had together today on the transition that has to be just and quick. As regard the French recovery plan, the French recovery plan has a target of 30% for climate and the principle do no harm for the 70% lasting. We have the same at European level. For sure, it's not the case at the international level. Very difficult, very tough. I am also the negotiator in G7 and G20 for environmental track. I can say that it's very, very tough, but we are progressing. In particular, if you look at the G7 final communiqué for environment, we have for the first time a decision on stopping all the investments on unbeaten coal this year. From 7 strong countries in the world, more economically developed country. Okay, we don't have the same commitment for the G20, but this is a movement that we have to support altogether. There are several changes in the world that make us confident. We see the change in the United States and in other parts of the world. We have to really invest in this kind of changes to make sure that transition can be really done in the forthcoming years, and before that it's too late. But for sure, if we want to make it simply and easy, apply the principle of do not harm, and it will be for sure easier to get at the targets that we have for the financial investments.
Thank you very much, Francesco, for this answer, and also for all the level of detail on the 4 priorities of the French presidency of the Council in 2022. I'll just give the floor for like a super short 1 minute final statement to our other two speakers, to Asad and to Tatiana, who have brought to the table very important ideas around the need for a transformative global Green New Deal, and also with Tatiana, well, bringing the sense of urgency that the young generation is feeling to the table. So a very short final statement from Asad and from Tatiana. Not more than 1 minute, please.
I'll be a minute. So I think we need to go beyond do no harm to undo harm, and that means for all EU policies, both inside and outside, ensuring fair share of 1.5, tackling inequality and sustainability. I think there's a recognition that in this game we're in this moment, winning slowly is the same as losing. So it's not simply about coal, but oil and gas as well. Recognizing the realities of a decade of austerity and low wage economy, that was a political choice inside the EU and beyond. And so the big question for all policymakers is, will the same failed economic paradigm that has led us to where we are this moment be able to deliver the sustainable and just transition that we want? And I just one final thing, I'd just say, the EU's stated policy is still competitiveness, trade at any cost. The fact that trade deals have been signed by the European Union without scrutiny, that incorporate corporate courts, that block the ability for citizens around the world to protect themselves, environmental standards and health standards, shows how big institutions and countries don't have joined up plans between their climate and economic policies.
Thank you, Asad. Tatiana, we started with you because we wanted to start the discussion really with the vision and the demands from the youth environmental movement. So I'll give you the floor again to basically close the panel with your final statement.
Thank you. Well, seeing the smart accounting behind the 55% emission reduction goal and the phrasing behind the zero pollution ambition and action plan, I realize, as well as many young people, we realize that there is a need that we stay alert and that we remain the watchdogs, because we feel like we're in a battle, and we're trying to not lose hope, but then every time we see the smart accounting and phrasing, that gives us another punch, but we rise up and we walk further. We do it in our free time instead of working on new ideas or developing new engineering projects. Let's say we watch our governments avoiding doing the type of things that I've mentioned just in the beginning of my statement. And we will continue doing that despite this taking us aback as a society. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana. So we've come to the end of our time for this panel discussion. So I would just like to thank you, the four of you, Francesco Gaeta, Françoise Bonnet, Asad Rehman, and of course you, Tatiana Stadnik, for being with us this morning. I think it was a very rich discussion. A lot of different things have been discussed. So thank you very much for bringing all your different ideas and demands to the table. After a very short break, we will now go to the conclusion of the first part of this conference with our Secretary General, Jeremy Waits, and my colleague, Patrick ten Brink, will explain to you how we'll proceed with the conference after the lunch break this afternoon. So thank you very much again for joining us, and see you for the second half of the conference.
Welcome back, everyone. And yeah, let me add my thanks to Patricia's, to our latest panelists, but also to all the speakers that we had this morning. And we had a really stimulating set of speakers and some great discussion there. We started off after the opening session hearing from the French Minister for Ecological Transition, Barbara Pompili, who presented a really impressive range of topics that the French presidency will have to address when it takes over on the 1st of January. And she grouped them into what she called four equal priorities. Firstly, climate change, decarbonisation, where she referred to both the path through the emissions trading system, but also the national emission reductions commitments, different instruments tackling this. And of course, there's a much broader set of instruments under the Fit for 55 package. She also really stressed the importance of addressing climate and social ambition jointly. And I think that was a recurring theme throughout the morning. Secondly, she talked about biodiversity and a cluster of issues there. The COP15, the Biodiversity International Conference, which will take place in Kunming, and the EU having a robust position at that. She talked about the nature restoration law that's in preparation, and she talked about forest policy. But she also talked about aligning agriculture with the farm to fork strategy and referred to the green taxonomy, which will identify what kinds of investments can be considered as actually sustainable. Thirdly, she talked about the circular economy and shifting the economic model, making particular reference to eco-design. And fourthly, she referred to pollution and a number of issues related to that, endocrine disrupting chemicals, banning the export of chemicals that are banned for use in the EU. So an impressive range of topics which then were picked up during the rest of the morning. And our second keynote speaker, Maria Neira from the World Health Organization, she gave us a very strong and clear message about just how positive our message is, and almost expressing some kind of bewilderment of why don't people get it, because it's good for the environment and it's good for health and it saves a lot of money. And you know, she really pointed out the co-benefits that come from tackling climate change, the benefits that derive for health. Her comparison with the tobacco industry was, I think, very apt, also very sobering, reminding us that it took 50 years from the moment that the proof was there that tobacco was causing cancer to the real action to address that. Some would say that's not completely there yet. And I loved her kind of image, or the image she put in my head, of huge signs outside petrol stations saying fossil fuels kill. Not because the EEB or one of its members have sort of climbed up a pole and put it there, but because it's a government requirement in the way that labels on cigarette packets are. I thought that was quite a powerful point that she made. And then we came to our panel, and the panel was kicked off by Tetiana Stagnik, voice from the Youth and Environment Europe, who reminded us that we need to take the freedoms of future generations seriously. And she made a rather nice comparison of the EU with a kind of poor student who hadn't done their homework, and pointed out that the 55% target, net target, by 2030 for greenhouse gas reduction, emission reductions, is well short of the more than 65% that's required by science. So yes, a step in the right direction, but by far from enough. And that we are heading into a world of something more like 2.5 degrees Celsius. She emphasized there's no safe level of pollution, the importance of respecting World Health Organization guidelines. And she also brought in the financial questions, which were picked up by others, that we need to end financial support to polluters. The polluters must pay, that we need ambitious and actionable nature restoration laws, and we mustn't have GDP as the main measure of progress. And finally, she mentioned that not enough funding goes directly to youth organizations, pointing out that a lot of this goes to other organizations who work with youth, and youth could actually probably do better things with it than others. And And then we also heard from Françoise Bonnet, bringing a voice from cities and regions, who reminded us just how important those levels are, the local, municipal and regional levels. Of course, they can't do everything, and she underlined that, but they can help. They cannot, for example, my example, decide on the standards that vehicle manufacturers will have to comply with, but they can establish low emission zones. And in fact, the more we fail to drive sustainability at the national, European or global level, the more important it is that the local, municipal and regional levels just move ahead and get on with it. And she gave several examples of cities doing just that. Some of them linked to the non-toxic circular economy concept. For example, tires as a major source of microplastics pollution. And we also heard from Assad Rehman from War on Want, who brought a very welcome global perspective to sort of mark the EU's scorecard, but also really highlighted the issue of fairness, and of course those two issues being very closely linked. And he reminded us about the rich world's hoarding of vaccines and the sort of hypocrisy of, you know, no one is safe until anyone's safe slogans ringing hollow in that context. And he spoke about the deep imbalances of power, deep inequalities both within and between countries, and the fact that inequality is getting worse. And he asked the question, the policy agendas in the EU, they're addressing the environmental crisis, but are they fair? And I think that's a fairly key test that he was asking us to subject them to. He also gave us a stark warning that we have only 500 gigatons left before we hit the 1.5, crash through the 1.5 limit, and said that we actually only have a 1 in 3 chance that we will stay within it, and expressed incredulity that this is public policy, while none of us would board a bus with that chance of arriving safely. And he spoke of there being a kind of modern form of carbon colonialism, that we've moved from climate denialism to mitigation denialism. He was one of those who also spoke about the scale of finance being pitifully inadequate. And yeah, gave the message that, yeah, the North's message to the South is do what I say, not what I do, and pleaded for ambition and imagination to fix this broken world, appealing also for more political will and more joined up thinking. And we also heard from Francesco Gaita from the French Ministry for Ecological Transition, who echoed, of course, many of the points his minister had made and elaborated on them, explaining that the French presidency will try to push the common position of Council in an ambitious direction. We know that they don't control the Council, so there's no illusions about that, but he pledged some level of ambition, mentioning that France is part of the Reach Up coalition, a group of the more ambitious countries in the Reach area. And he also, like the minister, emphasized the importance of a just transition, that the losers of transition must not be left behind, all must contribute, saying that we mustn't limit to just two mechanisms, the Just Transition Mechanism, Social Climate Fund, but other financial mechanisms, the NRRPs, National Resource and Recovery Plans, the multi-annual financial program, they must all be aligned with the do no harm principle, as must private investments. Well, I think I'm probably running up to the end of my time, but I want to mention, of course, we were disappointed that Veronica Manfredi from the European Commission was unable to join due to the technical problems, and it seems we're a little bit jinxed with this, because some of you who joined our conference last year will remember that my conversation with Commissioner Sienkiewicz got off to a bit of a rough start when they had technical problems as well. So hopefully we can solve these in the future. But I think many of the other comments did actually address the role of the Commission. So the Commission's voice somehow did come through, and hopefully the Commission's ears will also pick up on the messages that have come out of this. Well, I'm going to conclude at that, and I'm going to ask Patrick if he could present the results of the second Slido question, which is where you gave your feedback to us. So I'm going to hand to him to do that, and also he will introduce the afternoon session. Before doing so, I'd like to thank you all for your participation so far, especially our excellent speakers and panelists, and of course our donors, the European Commission and the German Environment Ministry. So, Patrick, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, this way. So I'll just take a few words on the second question. So this is a complicated question. We're asking is what is stopping decision makers from making substantive changes, even though the message on the risks of the environment, climate and health crisis are crystal clear. So we know what's happening. Why aren't we progressing as fast as we should? So coming in at first at 71% of respondents, and there are 97 respondents, powerful lobbying interest by some business creates a system lock-in. So there's a type of governance lock-in. So the conclusion is major efforts are needed to change access rights, governance issues, transparency, balance of influence. Okay, so there is a problem. It's governance and power imbalances, and I think it's fixable. The second came in second at 67% is our economic system, guided by GDP growth priorities and short-term profits, ties decision makers and businesses' hands, and we need a refocus on different business models, move from policy from GDP growth towards well-being and sustainability, and like that we can address that major blockage. The third one, identified at 63%, was that ideological, economic and political visions oppose sustainability. So for this we need a review of economic and political thinking to ensure it's fit for the future. And we heard also this discussion around in Mexico, we heard it in cities. We need to share what the benefits are, the win-wins are, to make it move forward. Then much lower down at 25% is decision makers are making progress, but it's understandably difficult. Oh no, sorry, I jumped one. At 23.5%, concerns about international competitiveness are making decision makers excessively cautious. There is a problem, but it's not our fault, and we need other people to fix it. And that came at 25%. Then there was a sort of a 6% basically having great sympathy for caution. So decision makers are making progress, but it's understandably difficult to change direction. So it's tough, but we can't, we understand it. Finally, 0%, no one basically concluded that progress is as fast as we can hope for. And everyone is already acting on the information. So 0% of the people said we should stop complaining and start applauding. Okay, so I think the message is pretty clear across all of this. We've got a lot of work to do. So let's then think for this afternoon session. First of all, it's lunch break for you now. At 1:45, we're going to come back for those who want to understand. The mural tool will have 10 roundtables, thematic roundtables, from climate change to governance to zero pollution industry. We're going to look at visions, inspiring practice, the need for system change, who can do what. So there'll be 10 tables. The tables start at 2, but at 1:45 I'll go through the process so you can get familiar with the tools. If you know everything, just come at 2. And if you want to see how it works, come at 1:45. We have 1 hour for the first table. Then we have a break. We jump to a next table, so you can actually join 2 different tables. And then we'll report back, and we have 10 EEB members coming to report back the results on basically what is the vision that we all hope for, what is the inspiring practice that should inspire us all so that we can get the momentum going faster, what is the system change we need to address, because ultimately small steps are not enough, and finally who can do what, because we only move forward if we actually do it. So I really hope that you join us. The roundtables will only be as good as the attendance, and therefore we need all of you to join us. But in the meantime, enjoy your lunch and see you back at 1:45. Thank you. And also thanks here to all the people helping in the office.